Ciarb's theme for International Women's Day this year is Breaking the Bias. It's genuinely inspiring to hear the views of women from around the world about what this has meant to them in their own careers, what it has taken and still may take to remove the barriers to equality for women in the profession, and what real, active allyship for women looks like. I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit more about my career to date, leading to my appointment as the Director General of Ciarb. I'm a solicitor and a mediator. I have an MBA, and I've been a Chief Executive Officer for around 10 years. I was the CEO of the Law Society of England and Wales, a CEO in the NHS in the National Health Service, and I ran the organisation that indemnifies the NHS called NHS Resolution, which deals with a claims budget of around 1.3 billion per annum and has over 16,000 pieces of ongoing litigation. And I introduced mediation into the NHS. I also ran a large further and higher education college. I spent most of my legal career in-house in the commercial, as the commercial director and legal director of Bupa, which is a large private healthcare provider and insurer. I was also general counsel of the NSPCC, which is a children's protection charity. I spent some time living in Canada. For the first 4 years, I was an outward bound instructor and then a director at Vancouver Coastal Health. But I started my career in private practice as a commercial litigator and used alternative dispute resolution on a regular basis. I left school early and joined the Army, which helped fund my studies. And as an officer of the British Army, I continue to play an active part in the reserve. When I'm not working, I'm cycling, and I broke the world record for the fastest circumnavigation of the globe on a tandem in 2020, just before I returned to the UK prior to lockdown. And I was appointed the Director General of Ciarb in May 2020, and I've been running the organisation since. So why do I mention all this? Well, it's safe to say that in my career, I've come across and continue on occasions to experience gender bias. My experience is that many women are incredibly talented, but don't always reach their full career potential. Sometimes this is a choice which arises because women do not want to spend the time networking, possibly on the golf course or in the bar, or being seen to be in the office longer than anyone else in order to demonstrate their talent. Sometimes it's because women are overlooked and the less experienced man is appointed because the women are not prepared or indeed able to compete on a level playing field. So how does all this play out in arbitration? The gender gap in commercial arbitration remains an issue, although some progress has been made. A report by the ICCA showed that between 2015 and 2019, the proportion of female arbitrators almost doubled from 12% to 21%. Whilst this is a big increase in a short space of time, it still leaves women comprising little over a fifth of arbitrators appointed to disputes. Clearly, the profession is still not reflecting the makeup of society as a whole. The underlying figures shed more light on what is behind the increase so far and may indicate how further progress can be made. Strikingly, women comprise of 34% of all arbitrators appointed by arbitral institutions in 2019, an indication that conscious efforts to promote gender parity by those organisations are bearing fruit. By contrast, party appointments of female arbitrators only increased from 9% to 14% between 2015 and 2019, whilst co-arbitrator appointments of women more than doubled from 10 to 22%. It seems that institutions have, to a limited extent, delivered on their commitments to improve gender diversity in arbitration, but there's still a lot of scope for further improvement. The figures since 2015 would suggest that the equal representation in arbitration, the RA pledge, has been successful in creating real and tangible change. The ICCA report also identified a number of barriers to increasing the number of female arbitrators, including the retention of women in private legal practice, the insufficient proportion of women to senior ranks within business, and lack of opportunities for women to gain relevant experience and reputation amongst the international arbitration community, as well as unconscious bias. So what about diversity in other forms of ADR? The lack of female representation is not only a problem in arbitration. A recent CEDA Foundation report showed that in the UK, only 33% of commercial mediators are women, and that on an average, a commercial mediation panel consisted of 28% of women. There are a similar picture in construction adjudication in the UK. As recently as 3 years ago, figures from the Adjudication Society showed that for adjudicator nominating bodies, female representation was as low as 4%. And even for the best performing institutions was only as high as 20%. So we still have some way to go. And if we are going to increase diversity, we all have our part to play. But instead of restating the problem, for me today is about solutions, celebrating how far we've come and the incredible successes that women from around the globe have achieved in breaking the bias, and also to identify some practical, tangible actions that we can take to build on these successes to move closer to real equality. Crucially, I want to emphasise the indispensable role that allyship must play in meeting this challenge, which is why I'm pleased that Ciarb's International Women's Day programme includes engagement from prominent men from across the profession. This conversation has to be about and between men and women. As the other contributors will show today, there is no single answer to the problem of gender inequality, and meaningful solutions generally take account of specific contexts in which they're applied. However, from my perspective, there are some indispensable principles for breaking the bias and creating real structural change. The first is genuine allyship. I can speak from first-hand experience about the difference men can make in delivering gender equality. Today, I want to spend time delving deeper into what that means in practice. How can men go beyond rhetorical support to play a proactive role? Secondly, representation. Gender equality must mean that women are seen. As Director General of Ciarb, I'm proud of the fact that we're committed to gender equality across our events and panels. This is more about than just appearances. It's about making sure women aren't held back from playing a full and equal role. And thirdly, development. We do have individual agency in tackling gender inequality, but women must also be given the tools to overcome structural obstacles to advancement. From my perspective, professional bodies like Ciarb have a crucial role to play in opening opportunities for advancement, from mentoring initiatives to proactively promoting women for new career openings. These are just some of my impressions about the nature of breaking the bias challenge and what it will take to meet it. On International Women's Day, I want to hear directly from you. What do these principles mean for you, and how can they be given practical effect? At Ciarb, we've developed an organisational strategy. Our three strategic aims are to globally promote the constructive resolution of disputes, be an inclusive global thought leader, and develop and support an inclusive global community of diverse dispute resolvers. At the heart of this new strategy is our approach to equality, diversity, and inclusion, which we wish to embed in everything we do, thereby enabling the best to succeed in the ADR profession, irrespective of their background. We're determined to ensure that we actively provide opportunities for underprivileged and underrepresented groups to progress and thrive, and to develop a culture across Ciarb which contributes and promotes EDI in everything we do. As I mentioned earlier, in 2020, I broke the world record with my cycling partner for riding around the world on a tandem bicycle. And I thought I'd share some of the lessons from my ride and from my career today. I'll start with the importance of resilience, which we have all seen over the course of this terrible pandemic, and keeping focus on things that are important, such as being the fastest in the world, or in an organisation such as Ciarb, ensuring that the organisation delivers the best value to its members whilst maintaining and driving professional standards. The importance of teamwork and developing and supporting the people around you, particularly over the course of the pandemic, when people are likely to be struggling with their health and well-being. Remember, you're only as good as your team. The importance of diversity, having people with different views and opinions, helps strengthen decision making. Live your values, and if something isn't right, always try and call it out respectfully. It won't always be easy, but you owe this to yourself and to the people around you. Be clear about your goals and go towards them with purpose and resolution. Develop long-term and meaningful relationships with your networks, not just short-term transactions. And if you don't like it, change it or live with it and be satisfied. Life is too short for regrets. Always lead by example. You can't expect people to follow you if you don't. Be yourself. So always be yourself. People will know if you are not being authentic and trying to be something that you are not. I wish you all a fantastic International Women's Day. Thank you.
Breaking the bias is a constant struggle. It means you are willing to make an effort every day not to be led on that something is natural and normal when it should not be. Breaking the bias is knowing that it is not about yourself or about someone close to you. It is not personal and it cannot be. To seek gender equality, racial equality, equality for LGBTQIA+ people is to go against your own instincts for a greater purpose. In order to break negative patterns, to perceive gender stereotyping, implicit bias, or even prejudice, we have to know them in the first place. We have to question the things we do on a daily basis and heighten our awareness of situations that could otherwise go unnoticed.
I think from my perspective, breaking bias means you come out of your usual comfort zone and stand out in the area that you feel you can make a difference. And specifically in the arbitration space, I think it's more of, you know, walking the journey of identifying yourself as someone who can have an impact in this space. So for me, I think as a female arbitrator, there's quite a number of biases that you would experience, right from the fact that it's a very, very male-dominated space. And so just coming out of your ordinary space, I'm a lawyer, so stepping out as a lawyer and saying, you know, I would want to come out and step into this space and also see that I can be an arbitrator, that I can have my space and I can have my seat. So it's, yes, it means that to me, yeah.
We cannot change what we are not aware of. Gender bias is one of the so-called similarity biases, which means that we prefer what is like us or what is different. And so we create boundaries between who we consider close to us and who we see as different. And then we tend to have a favorable view of those similar to us, but a skeptical or negative view of those who we perceive as different. And not so long ago, the world of ADR was a world where decisions and appointments were made exclusively by men. But the thing is, biases are a reality of how our brain works. I mean, they help us in certain cases and hinder us in others. I mean, they are useful. If there is fire in the room, having biases is something very useful. But biases prove or tend to prove disadvantages when taking more calm decisions. And the way out is being aware. I mean, being aware of assumptions is the only way we can break biases.
From experience and discussions with my women peers, I have found that often there may not be evident open bias or discrimination, yet women sense that they have or they are not being considered at par with men. Equality means equal opportunities, but women have fewer opportunities than men or are denied opportunities for reasons unrelated to their competency. They have to work doubly hard at a higher standard consistently to prove their mettle, and the tolerable margin of error is much narrower for them. Women cannot make mistakes. Over time, this creates a bunch of women who lose confidence in their abilities, become fearful, and are then perceived as incompetent. We fight for physical security for women, but what about professional and mental security at the workplace too, where a woman spends half of her time in the day and most of her life building her career? So, in my experience, it is an uphill task to reset biased attitudes of people towards women without women paying a cost. But it needs to be done for the sanity and vanity of the profession. At the same time, I have seen women suffering bias and extending it to self-doubt, self-criticism, self-destruction, and stigma. Women need to see bias as bias alone, nothing more. Sometimes our HR processes and decision makers in organizations and institutions also tend to avoid dealing with gender sensitive concerns or put them under the carpet. I thought this would have changed by now, but I know of cases where women lawyers were told that action could not be taken against a male colleague for insensitive conduct unless the woman filed an official complaint. Well, a woman may not want to adopt that route because this information may not be kept confidential. It causes embarrassment to the woman and impacts her career progression, while the male colleague is unscathed because he's not officially reported. So leaders in organizations and people in the ADR community need to become gender sensitive, perceptive of their women colleagues, and support them when they suffer bias. But it will be injustice if I don't mention that today I know so many wonderful men who are, if I can use the word feminists, and truly encourage their women colleagues to believe in themselves and excel in the profession. I know men who believe in gender equality, equal opportunities, equal pay for equal work, and who say, may the best person get the job, whatever the gender. So my experience in breaking the bias today says that we have a long way to go, but we are living in far better times with sensitive men and stronger women than yesterday to make an effective change.
It's not just a bias in terms of being considered for appointment as an ADR practitioner, but it can also be the more particular field of practice where we still see, say, a common acceptance or expectation of women practicing as mediators, particularly in the social services arena, rather than as arbitrators or adjudicators, and particularly in commercial construction matters. If I think my first appointment as an ADR practitioner for what was for a relatively low value, low complexity construction adjudication, so a fairly straightforward case, which is exactly where I should have been starting. But disappointingly, the immediate response from one party was to complain to the appointing authority in that case that my appointment was inappropriate because, and I quote, "What would a woman know about construction?" So that's a fairly extreme case, although regrettably, I don't think it's a complete outlier still. I think since I started this part of my practice, I have been able to build a personal brand and a reputation in the market within which I work, which is commercial and construction, probably through sheer determination and an unwillingness to quit. But I think it remains an ongoing challenge to break through what are quite well entrenched biases and biases that people are quite unaware of. I think it's far from hopeless though. It takes time to build credibility, and you do have to fight hard and you do have to persevere. It can be incredibly frustrating at times, but I guess when you have those moments of success along the way, well, I guess they wouldn't be quite as sweet if you didn't have to work hard for them. And we do need to work hard for these appointments. It's not a right to be an arbitrator. It's not a right to be a mediator. It's a real privilege to sit in those positions.
Breaking the bias is something, at least from my perspective and what I have tried to do, is something that you do by, first of all, being present. I think that being present is really very important. Just being in the room can break a lot of bias. That has been in my experience. I see that a lot of conversations, tend to be more thoughtful, and people tend to be more considerate when there's just someone very different in the room. And I think that that has been the main kind of way that I have been trying to, fight against the bias, is just by being there, just grabbing a seat and being at the table. And I think that's very important. I think what's another important point is that one should not be afraid to actually confront situations and be brave enough to say, when they see a bias, to alert that person and say, well, do you think that this is potentially a bias issue that we're looking at? I think that when we see these flags, we shouldn't shy away from trying to highlight them and trying to see, where people are coming from and how we can address these issues. And I'm personally quite a vocal person, so I also, I'm not afraid to speak up when I see something and try to have a dialogue about bias.
There are many ways to be allies to women in ADR. First of all, community about ADR in itself is quite collegial community. People are helping each other across the globe. When I started arbitration practice, there are few resources within Japan with respect to arbitration. So what I did is, sought assistance or support outside Japan. And there are many out there help me to get resources, or they got me involved in their cases so that I could have experience of arbitration outside Japan when there are so few arbitration in Japan. So the community of ADR itself is quite collegial. And on top of that, women in ADR community are very, very collegial. They know the challenges to be women in ADR. And we already seen many organizations or initiatives to help to give more opportunities to women to achieve the level, to give the level playing field for female practitioners. So there's a good ground already out there in arbitration community, and particularly female practitioners in ADR, to work together. And in a more concrete context, I would say, first of all, we will, in the arbitration practice, specifically speaking, for example, we will do our best to appoint female arbitrators. And talking about experts, particularly quantum experts, we see, primarily male, quantum experts, but we'll be able to find, younger quantum experts, younger, but female quantum experts. And I'm sure she will do an excellent job. So in our daily, professional life, we should pause and think whether there are any options available among female community, as an arbitrator or expert or co-counsel. We should do that kind of, exercise every time. And also talking about conferences or writing opportunities, we should pause and think whether there are any, female candidate we can invite. And that kind of, step or additional effort will definitely, as a group promote, female practitioners in the DL. And we've seen that already. And I'm quite, confident that this trend will continue.
The awareness would be a very, very good ally for us as women. to find the space and also just get the places to actually practice and do the arbitration. The other ally, of course, we need are the men in the space. You know, the men who have gone before us, who are more experienced, and if we can all if they can give more support, and by support I mean to look at it as a cause, and say that they need to engage and encourage and also promote more women to enter the space. For example, in my law firm, I have quite a number of male, colleagues that I work with, and female as well. And, as a woman, in as much as I'm one of the biggest promoters, and I always encourage my teams to have interest in arbitration or ADR, whatever space they can find, they can want to practice. I think even a voice of a man, adding on to that and inspiring and promoting the practice would be, and especially targeting the female practitioners or female lawyers as well. So that would be the second ally for us. Of course, the third ally would be the knowledge. We need a lot of knowledge empowerment. There's quite a number of capacity building that is required, just to be competitive.
I'd like to use the little phrase, which is rather light. Some are born to greatness, but some have greatness thrust upon them. I think I was in the latter group. I happened to be a part of our Ciarb branch at the stage in which we wanted to further educate our members. So I was asked to be the director of education for the branch. And I found that through my communications with Ciarb London, my insistence on reading further, every course that we offered, before they were offered, I myself began the reading for myself. And I stayed one step ahead of each group that was being trained, so that if we were training a group in international commercial arbitration, I had already received that particular certification. So I myself began to realize that this really was a very fascinating career. And as one gets a little older, one realizes that in addition to being a practitioner in the law, and as I've mentioned, I'm a retired justice, after retiring, there is still life. There is life after the law. And so the life after the law that was thrust upon me, and which I took so easily and very happily, was the life of the practice professionally as an ADR consultant, both in mediation and in arbitration. And as you know, I teach. And so to those who say that they're too old, I say not one bit of it. You need to pursue your particular desire in ADR and learn as much as you can, perfect your profession. That's what I did. I learned everything I could. And I also want to say that it's important to continue to learn. At my age, and one would say at my stage, this last year, I joined the virtual class, which participated in international commercial arbitration offered by Ciarb, and Professor Muhammad Wahib led the class. It's an excellent class. I took about 6 weeks. I joined and attended lectures every day in order to keep myself current. So it's a constant learning process. And my experience which thrust me into ADR as an observer and then a server to help those learn, allowed me to become a practitioner. And to that I say, thank you. Thank you, Ciarb, and thank you to those who have facilitated my learning particularly.
I was mesmerized about the promise that the ADR world poses as an alternative to litigation. For instance, that arbitrators are expected to really dedicate themselves to fewer cases over the usual overwhelming number of decisions a judge has to render. It all felt very modern, very futuristic, prioritizing party autonomy over getting unpredictable results from a higher power, much more distant and imperative. This active participation from the parties, which can build a procedure that is more suited to their needs, it changes your perspective as a lawyer and as a law student. It feels like you can make a greater impact when the work you put into your allegations, your oral presentations will actually be heard and not just get lost in the middle of a pile of papers.
Women in the legal profession in the United States continue to make strides. We are now over half of law students, and even lawyers going into the profession are almost half. The problem is, as you pass through the profession, the number of women seems to wither. So women of color also have lagged behind professionally. Women now do not have to put up with the barriers that we faced upon entry, and I'm glad of that. Still, too many women can't make a go of it in law firm life if they have children too. We continue to see these issues, and paid family leave, for example, is something that is very much on the table in lots of law firms. So the structure as it presently exists is still too rigid. And I think that women flee law practice and choose ADR, as I did, for the same reasons of flexibility that I had when I made that choice. So ADR is a field where you have more control over your life. And for all of us as wives and mothers, in addition to being working lawyers, that's really important.
I think the future is bright. I think that, I'm optimistic, to be honest. When I was just entering this field, there were a few pioneers in terms of female practitioners who went into ADR, and I've always looked up to them, and they were really genuinely inspiring to me. And I think that as I've been practicing in this profession, I see more and more women coming in, and I see more and more young, brilliant, enthusiastic, hardworking female arbitrators and female practitioners just entering into the field, not just in Bahrain, but also the Middle East as well. And I'm really excited every time I see these people and colleagues and practitioners. I'm so excited about it, and I think that the future is really quite bright.
Only recently, in 2019, did arbitration and mediation become a part of the official curriculum of law schools in Brazil. Adding to that, Brazil has also significantly expanded its participation at the Vismut competition in the past few years. Furthermore, we have noticed a drastic increase in the number of courses and professional trainings offered to students and young lawyers. It has been one of the main goals of the CAMCCBC, as well as of its Commission of Young Arbitration Practitioners, which is called New Generation CAMCCBC, or NewGen, to promote and to offer these types of job and academic trainings. Considering those three facts, I am optimistic that more women getting to law school and having more exposure to arbitration and mediation will lead to more women being introduced to this market. And I believe that our generation must create opportunities for them to thrive and to avoid a leaking pipeline of talents.
My personal hope for women in ADR is that more women will choose this as a career in dispute resolution and ace emerging commercial areas of law where their expertise in strategic thinking will be greatly required. We will need to remain deeply passionate about our work, constantly hone our advocacy skills, become the best version of ourselves, and have no fear of failure or treading new uncharted territories. I also hope that in a world that is torn in debates and fights over serious causes, women in ADR will add optimism, resilience, and a collaborative attitude to their toolkit as they embark on their journey. All this while obviously maintaining integrity.
My wish for the future of ADR is that we all together, institution and practitioners, succeed in making arbitration, mediation, and the other dispute resolution mechanisms as efficient as they can be. My personal hope for the future of women in ADR is that the presence of women becomes so common and valued in these arenas that there is no longer the need for events and articles talking about the issue.
I truly do believe that ADR across the board will continue to grow in prominence. The reality is that particularly now where courts the world over are heavily impacted by the COVID pandemic with significant delays for hearing fixtures, ADR can really step in to help get the resolution of many of those disputes back on track in an efficient and effective manner. I think related to that, we were already adopting new technologies for the delivery of ADR services prior to the pandemic. And I think that was turbocharged due to the pandemic. But with that early experience, I think we were able to transition relatively seamlessly into this new sort of normal of online ADR. For ADR more generally, I hope that we can continue to utilize that technology where appropriate to continue to improve the proportionality of the dispute resolution process for parties. In terms of women in ADR, we need to keep working on that. We do need to keep working toward greater proportionality of representation. This isn't something that will shift overnight, but I do believe we're moving in the right direction. I can only hope that we continue to make good progress toward the recognition of women in the profession as equals. And I think we'll know success when we no longer need to have this conversation, when we no longer need to discuss how we can ensure a woman is included on the shortlist or the proportion of appointments going to women. I think that's the point in time when we can be satisfied that we've really achieved the goal.
I really hope that we will see a return to a situation in which ADR is truly consensual. Contracts of adhesion are, in my view, a very flimsy and inadequate support for ADR. I think they're a fiction, and I think they devalue the entire field. And I would say also that ADR, like the rest of the legal field, benefits from the participation of women in so many ways. We need to bring our unique insights and our values to it. I hope that more women will choose it and prosper in it. I hope that we will see more diversity in arbitrator selection. It's not okay that accomplished women and minorities can't get arbitral appointments. And the fact that proceedings are private in arbitration makes it that much more difficult to get the word out about our experience and our talents. So I think that it's important in terms of diversity to ensure that there is not just one path to being an arbitrator in international matters, that there are other ways to get to that position. And I hope that women will choose ADR, and I hope that we will prosper in it. And I hope that the stories of the women in my generation will inspire women behind us to be all that they can be.
Hello, I'm Jane Gunn, and I'm the current president of FCIArb, and it's such an honour to be part of this video with the amazing women that you've seen so far, including our Director General, Catherine Dixon. All of these women, including myself, have made our way through the legal profession and as dispute resolvers, either mediators, arbitrators or adjudicators, through times where perhaps men were the majority in the legal profession. And we have had to deal with issues of bias, and now we talk about how we're breaking the bias and forming allies with our male colleagues. It takes me back to my training in the law in the 1980s, when definitely I was one of the minority, particularly in the field of commercial property, which I chose to practice in. And I remember particularly going to a meeting with my senior partner, and there were in a boardroom about 10 or 12 men in this meeting, and my partner. And he turned to me and said, "Jane, you run the meeting and I'll make the tea." And I said, "Oh, I run the meeting and you make the tea?" And he said, "Absolutely, yes." And that's exactly what he did. And he sat in the corner and took notes and made the tea for us. But at that time, that was an extraordinary thing to happen. And it stuck with me ever since, in that was a real act of partnership, of collaboration and of trust in a female colleague who might easily have been expected to make the tea herself. It would be remiss of me not to mention that since these videos have been recorded, we've ended up in a situation where we're experiencing a war in Europe, in the Ukraine. And I interviewed last week on one of my podcasts an amazing woman who is also a lawyer, a mediator, and an author like myself. And her name is Rian Esler. She's at the age of 91, still working, still writing. And Rian's history is that she was outcast from Vienna during the Crystal Night, where the Jews had to leave under cover of darkness, and ended up in Cuba, in the Havana. And her story then is one of trying to understand how we could resolve these disputes between men and women and in our society. And instead of looking at men and women as being in conflict with each other, what Rian has done is to look at what are the underlying traits that are in dispute. Is there a bias between the traits that we have upheld in our commercial lives and those that we have downgraded? Rian looks very much at the aspects of partnership versus domination. And these are traits rather than actual parts of what we are as male or female. And she sees that the domination trait is the one of adversity and aggressiveness, and that the partnership trait is much more the one of collaboration and caring. And Rian's work is looking at how we can bring those two into balance and understand how we have created some of the situations of bias towards male tendencies and traits in our workplaces over the last few centuries. What is the essence of mediation and dispute resolution? What can I, as a mediator, how can I help people to understand these essential skills and build them into their lives and to their workplaces? I became known during lockdown as the barefoot mediator. And that to me is what's really important about the work that we all do in this field of dispute resolution, being able to help everybody to integrate those principles into their work, into their life, into their families, and never more so at the time we're in now, which I believe is really a pivotal time in our history. So I thank you all for being part of International Women's Day. I think there's no more important time to celebrate feminine energy, breaking the bias, creating allyship with our male colleagues, and working out how we can promote partnership, collaboration across society. Thank you very much, all of you, for being part of International Women's Day, and thank you to all our women who have taken part in this video.